Christ has risen from the dead, as he had announced. What a great source of joy this day is for us. The Lord has truly risen. Christ came back and united his soul with his body that laid in the tomb. There had to be this reunion, of course, because Christ's soul had descended into the limbo of the just to rescue the righteous of the Old Testament and brought them to heaven. But in both his soul and his body, the divinity remained ever present. Then, miraculously, his body with his soul are reunited, and our Lord rose from the dead. This great fact of the resurrection of Christ is so important for us that St. Paul says in the first letter to the Corinthians that if Christ has not been raised, in vain is our preaching. Your faith also is in vain. Why? Because if Jesus, in whom we believe, didn't rise, then we wouldn't have faith. We would just have faith in a mere man, right? That was not in any way who he claimed to be, thus making our faith meaningless. St. John Paul II says that the resurrection completes the truth of the incarnation, because in the resurrection is shown more clearly what St. Paul says also in his letter to the Colossians, for in him resides all the fullness of divinity, dwells bodily. This fact is so important that the apostles presented themselves as witnesses to the resurrection of Christ. And when they chose an apostle to replace Judas, they sought one who had witnessed the resurrection. So we need to conform our lives to the truth of Christ's resurrection. He is alive, and it's an historical fact, a fact variable historically. And if anybody claims that, no, the resurrection didn't happen, there was no miracle at all, how much more miraculous then it would be and amazing that the 12 apostles, they gave their life for a man who was crucified as a criminal, who died and didn't resurrect, right? And they made up the story themselves. Not only them, but all of the martyrs who followed throughout the history of the church. So let us rejoice in this truth of the resurrection and live as if we have rose from our own sin, right, in the follies of the world. St. Paul said, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, which is where Christ is seated at the right hand of God, with our feet well on the ground, but our eyes and our heart always gazing heavenward, seeking to be saints, seeking not to be dominated by the things of the world, seeking to have our heart solely intent on the hope of heaven. That's why we call this day in a very particular way Holy Resurrection. A little adjective, holy, doesn't apply to many other mysteries in the same way it does to our resurrection, because it tells us that we have to live like we are resurrected. Is the same thing as living as if we were sanctified, right? Or sincerely seeking holiness. So we ask the Blessed Virgin Mary, who was the first one to celebrate this great solemnity, to implore her to give us a great spirit of joy on this Easter Sunday, because Christ has truly resurrected.